first saw you, I closed my eyes and the flashback starts. I'm standing there on a balcony in summer air. See the lights, see the party, the ball gowns. See you make your way through the crowd and say hello. Little did I know that you were Romeo, you were throwing pebbles, and my daddy said stay away from Juliet. And I was crying on the staircase, begging you please don't go. And I said, Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone. I'll be waiting, all there's left to do is run. You'll be the prince and I'll be the princess. It's a love story, baby, just say yes. So I sneak out to the garden to see you. We keep quiet cause we're dead if they knew. So close your eyes, escape this town for a little while. Cause you were Romeo, I was a scarlet letter, and my daddy said stay away from Juliet. But you were everything to me, I was begging you please don't go. And I said, Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone. I'll be waiting, all there's left to do is run. You'll be the prince and I'll be the princess. It's a love story, baby, just say yes. Romeo, say neither try to tell me how to feel. This love is difficult, but it's real. Don't be afraid, we'll make it out of this mess. It's a love story, baby, just say yes. I got tired of waiting, wondering if you were ever coming around. My faith in you was fading when I met you on the outskirts of town. And I said, Romeo, save me, I've been feeling so alone. I keep waiting for you, but you never come. Is this in my head? I don't know what to think. He knelt to the ground and pulled out a ring and said, marry me, Juliet, you never have to be alone. I love you and that's all I really know. I talked to your dad, go pick out a white dress. It's a love story, baby, just say yes. We were both young when I first saw you.
Caught between the twisted stars, the plotted lines, the faulty map that brought Columbus to New York. Betwixt between the east and west, he calls on her wearing a leather vest. The earth squeals and shudders to a halt. A diamond crucifix in his ear is used to help ward off the fear that he has left his soul in someone's rented car. Inside his pants he hides a mop to clean the mess that he has dropped into the light of lightsome Juliet Bell. And Romeo wanted Juliet, and Juliet wanted Romeo, and Romeo wanted Juliet, and Juliet wanted Romeo. Romeo Rodriguez squares his shoulders and curses Jesus, runs a comb through his black ponytail. He's thinking of his lonely room, the sink that by his bed gives off a stink, then smells her perfume in his eyes, and her voice was like a bell. Outside, the streets were steaming, the crack dealers were dreaming of a Uzi somewhere near Discord. I bet you I can hit that light with my one good arm behind my back, says little Joey Diaz. Brother, give me another tote. Those downtown hoods are no damn good. Those Italians need a lesson to be taught. This cop who died in Harlem, you think they get the warning? I was dancing when I saw his brains run out on the street. And Romeo had Juliet, and Juliet had her Romeo, and Romeo had Juliet, and Juliet had a Romeo. I'll take Manhattan in a garbage bag with Latin written on it that says, it's hard to give a shit these days. Manhattan sinking like a rock until the filthy Hudson, what a shock. They wrote a book about it, they said it was like ancient Rome. The perfume burned his eyes, holding tightly to her thighs, and something flickered for a minute, and then it vanished and was gone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to all of our attendees. It's so great to see your little Zoom buttons popping up on our screens here. And welcome to Conversations with, the series put on by Bard on the Beach, and today's panel, Reimagining Shakespeare. My name is Christine Quintana, and I'm really excited to be your host today. For those that could use it, the closed captioning is turned on. There are automatically generated captions available. You look at the CC button at the bottom of your screen and click Show Subtitles. Automatic captions will come up if that's useful for you. Today's panelists are joining us from 4 different cities, including Mumbai, India, and 3 on Turtle Island. And we acknowledge the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Treaty 6, which encompasses the traditional territories of numerous nations, including the Cree, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Ojibwe, and the homeland of the Métis Nation, and the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And where I am right now, I am about a 20-minute walk away from a place that is currently known as Vanny Park, but which is also Sinnock, which is a vibrant Indigenous village that was the site of trading, of culture, of storytelling, and is now the site where Bard on the Beach puts up its festival. And I think it's really important as we consider the ongoing impacts of colonization on Turtle Island to think about what stories, what arts and culture were here, and what kind of arts and culture we're putting out now. And I'm very excited today to welcome our incredible panel. We have Deshik Vansadia joining us from Mumbai. We have Yvette Nolan joining us from Saskatoon. And we have Ravi Jain joining us from Toronto. And it's so exciting to have such a powerhouse group of theater practitioners whose work often intersects with and riffs on Shakespeare. Hi. Good to see you all.
Hello.
And special shout out to Deshik, because I know it's 3:30 in the morning where you are. So I just think that's brilliant, and probably no one would have known if I didn't say.
I'll take the brownie points.
That's good, you deserve them. I just wanted to start off by asking each of you just to say a little bit about yourself and your theater practice and maybe the context that you're working in. And I know that you all have multiple projects that you've done that intersect and riff on Shakespeare. If you could tell us a bit about kind of your favorite one or the one that's on your mind right now, just to give our attendees a little glimpse into what your practice is. I will allow someone to volunteer first instead of choosing someone. There it is.
Oh no,
So you
I
win,
missed out
Desh.
on that. Sure. So hi, my name is Desh. I am in Mumbai, India. I am the artistic director of the Shakespeare Company of India. We do all three streams of work: performance, actors training, and Shakespeare in education. All based in Mumbai, but we travel with our productions as well. A member of we're 7-member company who are the full-time core company members, but then there are others who join us project basis. One project that's what I'd like to talk about is the one that we opened last year. And we just managed to do 3 shows, and we went into a lockdown. And we obviously put a lot of work in it, and we wanted to revive it. So we were on the verge of reviving it, and we're hit by the second wave. So we're again going into lockdown. So, and some of the actors had to leave the city. They're probably not coming back, but nonetheless, I will, this is close to us because, so we're not supported by any government aids or any other aids. So it's a constant challenge. You know, one of the reasons we have to reimagine Shakespeare is also logistically make it possible to create a show that we can sustain. I don't want to make the story too long, but we opened a show called Shakespeare's Lovers on Valentine's Day because we want to bring in the audience, which is, we have the first generation in India who has English as their first language. So we want to draw in that audience for our play. So we're, should I go into the nitty gritty of what it is? I should, okay. So, so it starts out with, so we're about 8 actors on stage, just blocks. We start out with quotes, and we're all in harmony. We're doing different love quotes, obviously. And then, you know, one of the quote that one male actor ended up saying is, you know, oh, she is a woman, therefore to be wooed. You know, she's fair, therefore to be won. And the female actor takes objection and she's like, excuse me? And so he said, you know, I'm paraphrasing it, but isn't a man of pretty things for much ado? And he goes about with his hose and doublets and leaves off his wit. And then the guys take the offense, and then we exchange insults at this point, and it escalates. And then all of a sudden, we're Montagues and Capulets, and Romeo is heartbroken. So Benvolio and Mercutio are asking the audience, like, what do you do when you're sad, heartbroken, angry with love? And we shout out, you sign up for a Tinder. So we bring a cutout of Tinder where different female characters of Shakespeare come in. They all have funny, unique profile. And Romeo is not into any of that. So swiping left, every single one of them. We have Desdemona, we have Viola, you know, we have Catherine. So we introduce these characters who are going to come later in the show. And I'm going to wrap it up now. So eventually we get Juliet, who's posed like this, and there's nothing. And I'm like, there's nothing. Who makes a profile with nothing? But of course, Romeo slowly walks up and he touches the hand, swipes her right, and they go directly into their first meeting, which is the Shakespearean first meeting of Romeo and Juliet. And so on and on. So we go in and out of Shakespearean scene, and then we end that scene. Notice breaks them off, and one of the cast member comes and says, whoever loved, that loved not at first sight. And I come in and I say, well, I'll tell you who. My parents. You see, my parents got married, that they had their honeymoon, that they had my sister, then they had my other sister, then they had me, and then maybe they fell in love. You see, they were not Romeo and Juliet. They were Kate and Petruchio. And then we go into Kate and Petruchio, and we go on like that. So it really works for us because we change into costumes right there and then. If our conversation allows, I can get more into why we want to do minimalistic Shakespeare productions, just out of basic necessity of how it just has to happen in the city, because we've all learned hard way by making huge, the early ones, when you're ambitious as a director and you think the world is on your palm, and you create this uncut Shakespeare production with 13 actors and you put like 7 months of your life into it, and it doesn't do enough shows. And that's when I'm like, okay, let's make a show that's gonna be easy to run, because we don't do straight runs. We have too many theater groups and very little performance spaces. So we have to be very innovative, and we have to perform at places that are not even meant to host a performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's move the chairs of this cafe. Let's move the tables over there. Acoustics, no problem. We'll take care of it. Oh, you have an office. Well, what happens after 7 p.m.? Nothing? Well, here is an idea. Why don't we, so we have to just, we had to design a show which just works everywhere. And at this point, we had run out of funds. So just that, what if 8 actors also become the 8 producers? And we all put money in the hat, and I write and direct the show. And but our first 2 shows were for schools, so we got our money back, and we started to do the ticket shows, and that's when COVID hit. But this is something that we're looking to just get back to.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's so fascinating. And I have so many questions, but we'll save them. Yvette or Ravi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Ravi's holding off for the cleanup spot.
Do you want me to
I don't know. I'll go because I have already questions too, but we have to introduce ourselves before we can get to questions to talk about. I am Yvette Nolan. I am I'm a playwright, a director, a dramaturge. I was the artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts in Toronto, which is Canada's oldest Indigenous theater, for 8 years. And while I was there, the company of actors came to me and said they weren't getting the gigs in Shakespeare. They didn't have the tools to get the auditions. And so I arranged for an intensive with Kathy Kennedy McKinnon, who's a text and tools coach. And it was an intensive with all women, coincidentally. And they came together and they started working on the Shakespeare. And I'm like, great, I've done something that the actors wanted. And then they were like, now we need a show. And I was like, oh, what? And so we adapted Julius Caesar to an all Indigenous a play called Death of a Chief, which was not such it wasn't hard to do because really it's about, Indigenous politics where you raise a leader and then that leader fails. And so you tear the leader down, you replace them with another leader, which is kind of what happens in band politics here a lot. So we adapted Shakespeare and we co-produced it with the National Arts Center. It was the first all Indigenous Shakespeare to be done at the National Arts Center, revisioning notwithstanding. And it was satisfying on a whole bunch of ways, but it wasn't my first, I've been immersed in Shakespeare all of my life. Caesar was my first Shakespeare as a child. But I had written like 4-person Othellos as a young playwright, and I've always sort of played with it. And now the thing that I'm doing that is sort of most interesting, see how I'm getting all of my Shakespeare's into my one little, what's my favorite Shakespeare? I'm working right now with Stefan Wolfert and Dawn Stern, who are 2 Americans, friends, close personal friends of mine. They run a thing called Decruit, which is about dealing with trauma through Shakespeare. And I'm working with them on a couple of pieces. They live in a van. They travel across the country doing this Decruit work. And we're working together on something called She-Wolf, which is the story of Margaret d'Anjou taken from the Henrys and the Richard, and kind of cobble together those pieces. And Dawn is Margaret, and Stefan is everybody else pretty much. And they've got 2 other companion pieces that they're working on. One is The Head of Richard, in which he is Richard the Third and Dawn is almost everybody else. And the other one is a Mackers. They're doing a 2-person Mackers. But we were working on these before the pandemic hit, and we had a 4-person She-Wolf, and we were thinking it would be like a 1-person Richard, a 2-person Mackers, and a 3-person what's left, the other one, Mackers, She-Wolf, the other one. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly they can work together in space because they're married and partners and living in a van together. And we've been working like this, me in a room and them in a room somewhere together, which is weird, but also fantastic, in the hopes that, so they have these pieces that they can travel around and do. And then in the hopes that one day we can actually work in the room together and run them all in rep. So I love playing with the words and the text. I love what Stefan and Dawn have done, pulling together all of those bits of Margaret. And it's She-Wolf because she's a warrior. And instead of being sort of the witch we see in the play, in the corner cursing, being cursed by Richard, she's actually she has a whole life and a whole arc pulled out of those 4 plays. I think that's it. I'll throw to Ravi so that we can hear what he's got up his sleeve, and then we can talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Yvette. Thanks, Desh. So I'm Ravi. I'm the founder and co-artistic director of a company called Why Not Theater. We're based, as Christine said, in Toronto. And we do a bunch of things, but I'll talk about the work that we make is really all about challenging the status quo of what stories are told and who gets to tell them. And I think for me, what's so interesting about all classics is just the history of who's been able to tell these stories, and that actually we've only had one, for the most part, beyond innovations like what Yvette is talking about in terms of the indigenous all-female production of Julius Caesar. We've really had only one perspective about of how to tell these stories that has dominated kind of how we understand and see these stories and who they're for. And so for me, I find a lot of Canadians approach classical texts as if it's a destination rather than a map. And I love what Yvette said about playing with the words. For me, is really about discovering the story and playing with the lens through which the story is told. And so a big thing for me is just when you flip the who of the story, you actually rediscover what you never saw in the piece itself, because you're so used to one way of seeing and hearing. And so the two kind of major impactful experiences I've had recently, one was a production of Hamlet we called Prince Hamlet. It was an adaptation I directed and adapted with an artist named Dawn Jenny Burley, who's a deaf actor who's Canadian but based in Finland. And it was a fully integrated American Sign Language and English production of the play. And the casting had a female Hamlet, which sadly in Canada, in a professional level, had never been done. And so we defied gender, we defied race, and we defied abilities in the casting. And what was so illuminating was that for hearing audiences, they got to see and hear the play in a very different way. And for deaf audiences, they actually had access in a way to the play to understand and experience the play for the first time that went beyond just interpretation, that went beyond just a kind of idea of, well, you can be here too. And it offered them a theatrical experience that was equivalent to the hearing artists or hearing audiences. And that was a really deeply impactful process for me. And then also really thinking about, in the deepest way I've ever done, about the fact that there were really two audiences that were present. There were the hearing audiences and there were the deaf audiences. There are the people who know the story and the people who don't know the story. And with all of these things available to us, we can play with how the story is told, what lens and what things we focus on to illuminate what we can talk about today. And so the next piece that I'm working on that was just announced is a production of Romeo and Juliet with a blind artist named Alex Bulmer. That's going to happen this summer, which, during the pandemic times is really interesting because Romeo and Juliet is a play that happens during a plague. And also to explore it through a play about identity through the lens of someone whose experience in life is not just through the visual experience, but the oral experience, is another way, again, to defy what our assumptions are about who these people should be, what they represent, and how we tell that story. And so the freedom to rediscover the plays by just changing the who and really thinking through the experience of who the story is for is where I get a lot of excitement and kind of, in a lot of ways, refined why we keep coming back to these things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ravi. And I know, I will never forget seeing the interpretation in ASL of the speech about Ophelia's death. I'll never forget it as a hearing person to get to see ASL performance like that with text that I know and love already was so special. To know that there's kind of a prism of experiences on that performance. And yeah, it's so fascinating. What I'm picking up from all three of you is that you're asking big questions about access and who Shakespeare is for, both for artists and audiences. And so I'm going to let you ask each other your questions, even though I have some of my own. But for everyone listening, if you have a question that you'd like to ask the panel, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom or pop it in the chat. We're not using the raise hand function, so you can raise your hand if you want, but don't. And I have somebody helping me, Baraka's helping me monitor the Q&A, and she'll pass this on to me. But Yvette, I had a sense that you had some questions bubbling.
I have so many questions, but there's so many things that I want to hit on because so much of the power is power over words is power over the world, right? And that's sort of, I don't know if that's why we keep returning to Shakespeare, but I know that we're also all working with translation in a way, to see Shakespeare being interpreted in American Sign Language is a translation, right? And the words don't line up the same way. And I did 2 translations for the Play On project out of Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I did the 2 Henrys, Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2, and the purists were howling because why should we translate Shakespeare? We just translated it into contemporary English, and the first rule was first do no harm. So it wasn't an adaptation, except when translation is, of course, adaptation, but it was a straight translation. And Desh, what you're talking about too, in terms of access to the plays by integrating contemporary language and then Shakespeare language, and what is this? Tinder, the swipe, right? And Palm to Palm and Holy Palmer's Kiss. It's so brilliant, but we're all dealing, this is an act of translation. And so is translation actually resistance? How's that for a question?
I love that. And it's obviously on the mind because we had a question come in about whether, Desh, if you've performed Shakespeare not in English at any point, which is, I think we're all getting at that question of translation of the text.
Right. So I to that I will say that. So first of all, the answer is not real, and that's because I didn't go to English medium school, so I didn't speak English till I was 24. And when I was attending acting school, I had no Shakespeare in my life whatsoever. I didn't know. I just knew his name, and I probably knew that he probably wrote something like Romeo and Juliet, but maybe I'm getting the name wrong. I was really at that level. And I was in my voice class, I was given Shakespeare's few speeches as part of the Linklater, you do the speeches at the end. And I had Edmund's speech. And as I was speaking the speech, I didn't understand like 75% of it because I couldn't read the play. It would have taken me 2 semesters to read King Lear. I couldn't understand what Edmund was talking about. I got the gist. I went on Wikipedia, I read, and I realized it's an exponential difference between, analyzing, thinking about Shakespeare, and speaking Shakespeare. Like you speak that, and I have yet, and I introduce Shakespeare to hundreds a year. I have yet to witness a body that does not enjoy speaking Shakespeare. I have yet to witness. It hasn't happened, and I meet like very anti-colonial people in my country, who are not against. I mean, for them, Shakespeare is a white dude, an English dude who wrote a long time ago and in English. Why are we not doing Indian writers' work, like hardcore people? And I'm like, okay, I'm with you. Why don't you just read the prologue of Henry V? And I have yet to witness a body that doesn't enjoy Shakespeare. Same thing happened with me. As soon as I started speaking Edmund's speech, I didn't understand what I was talking about. And somehow I had such a bodily reaction to it. And I was so full of rage, and all the injustice that I had witnessed somehow flashed through my mind. And I wanted to do some I wanted to pay back. It was my time now. And at the end, and it's like, those are the exact words. I mean, the little words that I did understand, I grow, I prosper. I mean, that much English I could understand. And when I spoke those words and I sat down, and from that moment on, the reason for me to do Shakespeare has purely been the language. We want to do Shakespeare. I personally want to do Shakespeare in his language. However, we do translate, and because I am fascinated with the backdrop of India, because there's so many elements of Shakespeare plays where I feel like, have we not traveled in time at all? Like, have we, like, why does this sound so like yesterday? Like, why, I mean, it's still happening every day. And I'm like, there's no way. I mean, I see it. Every audience member is going to see it. So might as well make those characters as Indian as possible. And it's a difficult situation, but a beautiful artistic challenge, because in India, speaking English is a sign of upper class. So, when you have like the cobbler in the beginning of Julius Caesar, it makes sense for him to not speak in English, or the mechanicals not speaking in English. So those areas where, when we did Measure for Measure, like, what do we do with Mistress Over again? Because we can all because Indian government had just recently shut down all the red light areas when we were about to do measure for measure. So we're like, we can all see these characters so directly. I mean, if we have them speak in English, what are we doing to the illusion? What are we doing to the storytelling, you know? So we do change the language, and I do not have a very sophisticated process. It's basically have the actors in the room, keep on improvising till I say, that sounds, that, not that. So, and we do that. And that's how we keep the that's how we enter the non-Shakespearean text into the Shakespearean play.
I'll jump in and say I love the question, and I think in terms of is translation an act of resistance, and I love, it's so inspiring to think that way, and I think you're right that I feel that it is, and I think that for me part of why I feel it is anytime we do a classic, it's like we're taking the analog and making it digital, and that act of translating it for the now, the was for the now, is so fascinating to me to think about, that we're always in attention of the values of that time, how it was done before, all of the trappings of and you know museum of it all, and that in the translation of ripping away from that, I think that the act of resistance for me is like, not only with the language, which I love, it's also the form of it and how it was told, how we think it was supposed to be told. Like, I find it so amazing that there's so much in these plays, but so often it's like you see the same play over and over, no matter where you go.
Well, yeah. And they totally resent you when you don't show them the same play. I mean, when we did Death of a Chief, which was all Shakespearean text, but, you know, pulled together to tell our story, we were told, the review actually said that there were lots of plays that Indigenous folks could do, including Midsummer Night's Dream and Coriolanus, but Death of a Chief was not, but Julius Caesar was not one of them. That's what the review said. We were told by a white reviewer what we as Indigenous people were allowed to do with Shakespeare, which is like, so there's that thing too of like, who gets to say, who gets to do what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what's super fascinating, and you know, I'd be curious, Desh, in India, what the response was in terms of Black Lives Matter and this latest kind of racial reckoning that's happened, because Yvette, I think about like a review like that then, and where we are now, and what shifted perspective would people approach that work that was once written off so flippantly, to really think about what it can reveal to today. And I'll share specifically with Hamlet, you know, what was fascinating for us, we made that in 2016, and we fought so hard to get a Canadian tour out of it, and we got it. We lost money on it because we underwrote it, because we were like, okay, well, we have to do it. We got to 4 cities in Canada, and everyone said, oh yeah, like, we're super into it, good for you, cool, sign language, yeah. And then nothing. And we had this fancy American agent, a racial reckoning happens, COVID happens, and now we have like a 5-city US tour booked for fall 2022. And so how we think about the revision lens on this work and the work that you were making, you know, how do we see that all now? And what's the opportunity in that? What's the failure of that, first of all? And then what's the opportunity of that, I think, is something for artists to think about too.
Yeah. I feel like the question that I have to ask is like, to take that oppositional voice that Desh mentioned he encounters a lot, which is why Shakespeare? Like, why not just let it go? And particularly thinking about, like, it doesn't get in some ways more colonial than Shakespeare, like in terms of his literary colonization and the colonial relationships of both of our countries to to what Shakespeare symbolizes, like what would you say to people that say, why don't you adapt something else? Like, why do we keep coming back to him?
Who gets to say what we get to do, you know? Like I didn't intend to make a Shakespeare play at Native Earth because Native Earth is about Indigenous voices. The artists in the community wanted that. They wanted a chance to speak the speech trippingly on the tongue. They wanted that. And so we responded to the request from the community. Why do we get to say who gets to play with him? Because he is so preeminent in everybody's, you know, like Desh saying he didn't know who Shakespeare was, but he had heard of him, and, you know, maybe he wrote that play. Like everybody, he's so far in front of us that everybody aspires to that. And because power over language is power, that I just can't. My mother was a residential school survivor. Her first language was Algonquin, her second language French, her third language English. She introduced me to Shakespeare. My father was an Irish speaker from Ireland. His language was suppressed. So those are two people who've lost their first languages because of Shakespeare's people, really. And yet still, I don't know, like it's a bête noire. It's a twisted sort of fascination we all have with Shakespeare and the power. And, you know, maybe he just has his own magic that we're all attracted to. You know, the magic that makes Desh say the Edgar and be like, this is what I want to do.
I mean, the writing is just good. There's no denying that. I think it's good writing. I mean, people say to me all the time, why Shakespeare? You know, why not Indian writer? Why not this or that, or take stories from our Indian ancient literature? My go-to response is, I always say, do you know, brother, what you sound like? You sound like a pro-arranged marriage person. You know, that's an arranged marriage, because you think you're born in this country, you should only do plays from this language or that literature. But you wouldn't want that. You would want to fall in love and not care about where that person is from, how old that person is, what religion that person is. You would want to marry that person. And this is the new generation who doesn't want to do the arranged marriage. That's the old stuff. So that's what it is. I fell in love. I love the language, you know. So that's really the main reason. He happens to be from 16th century, which is something that I have to deal with.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think too, just for perspective, and I think it's like, no one on this panel would say only Shakespeare. I think that for sure it's important to have perspective and know that he and it is one of many, and that there is a globe of storytellers, of which he's among them. And I think that perspective is important and maybe lacking, particularly in Canada, or maybe that's changing. And then I agree with both Desh and Yvette too. Like, they belong to us too. In terms of who gets to tell them, they belong to us too. And we can see ourselves in them in ways that traditionally you didn't. And so the defiance and the reclamation of that, for, as Yvette says, a reinterpretation of her own story or a reinvention of his story, we have the ability and the freedom to be able to do that, because also other people get to do it. I love that. So we should too, and it's ours too. And yeah.
Love that. Were you going to say something, Yvette?
Yeah, I want to just toss in Jimmy Blais' play Wardo, because there is sort of a real struggle especially in Indigenous country about this exactly. Like I love Shakespeare, but I feel it's like a dirty secret. I feel bad because people are always challenging me about. So Jimmy Blais has written a play called Wardo, and one of the things that he's grappling with it in there is is this love of Shakespeare, and there's a, you know, and what it means to be in love with Shakespeare as an Indigenous person. And so it's, and so it's having it your cake and eating it too for Jimmy, right? Because he gets to put Shakespeare into the play about resisting Shakespeare, and he's grappling with that, like that fighting back against Shakespeare, against the fact that he is who he is, and we're all, you know, yeah, and we're all always having to defend ourselves if we choose to do Shakespeare.
Yeah. Well, I got another question that came from one of our audience members, which I think is really the core of what I think a lot of Shakespeare practice is wrestling with right now, which is when you are imagining Shakespeare with a non-European and anti-patriarchal lens, what is your approach around the sort of intrinsic racism and misogyny that's inherent in so many of his texts, kind of any way that you slice it? And this person mentioned, for example, the editing of Taming of the Shrew at Bard a couple seasons ago, which kind of reframed Petruchio's brand of misogyny as like societal misogyny. Where are you all landing in your practice with taking on those parts of Shakespeare's texts?
I discovered the hard way that it really, I discovered with the Taming of the Shrew, we switched the gender. So men played women played men, but not the gender of the characters, but the gender of the actors. And we had, the women were really angry at the play because we're performing the play in metro cities where, you know, women have moved on from being Catherine. Now they're educated, they have jobs. They have the option of walking away from the marriage, and they didn't like it. And so we started to shift the demographic of the play and started to perform in middle class India. And women started to relate with Catherine because they were living in a world where they got it, that, you know, you don't have the option of walking away from the marriage. So that's what I learned, that it's really important as a director to, as you're devising and designing the production, who is going to watch it. I think it has to begin right from the vision and the editing, and it has to directly connect to who is going to watch it. You know, I think it should be very custom made, very specific.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that the values of now, you know, the values that you express in the story you tell reflect the values that you, you know, believe and want to share in the world. And so if we're not conscious of that, I think that's a responsibility for us as storytellers. And if we choose to retain, you know, the values of the past in that regard, I think that we need to be aware and conscious of that, and either point to the tension because that's the point, or find a way to translate it into now. I think we need to be responsible and accountable to those choices that we make.
Yeah, I don't think some of them are redeemable. I don't think Shrew is redeemable. I think as an Indigenous woman living on this land where we have, like, you know, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, like MMIWG, and everyone in the country knows what that means. I don't need to go to theater to be told that women are oppressed. Like, I don't know that it can be resolved. Someone once asked me what I would do with the Shrew, and I said, well, if I can put her in an orange jumpsuit with a bag over her head, then I'm sort of just making the same point that Shakespeare is. So I don't know that I think especially now as we're going into skinny times, right? Because the resources are going to be smaller after this pandemic. as you know, Desh is like already having to deal with resource issues in order to do Shakespeare. I think we have to be wiser with how we spend our resources. What are the stories we want to tell? And I think Shrew can be retired for, well, until we're in The Handmaid's Tale, you know, until we're in Gilead, in which case we can do Shrew again. But so we got close a couple of years ago, but now we seem to be safe again. I think there's other more edifying Shakespeares to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, oh, there's so many threads I want to pick up on and we're running out of time. But I'm really interested in this question of audience and putting audience first. And I think it's really interesting that we all know the origins of Shakespeare as working class entertainment with a couple of special balcony seats. And at least in Canada, it's come so far from that. It's become kind of a sort of bourgeois, or it has the impression to the public as being something that's not accessible. And so I'm wondering for who is your ideal audience for your Shakespeare?
I mean, in terms of enjoying the play, sorry, go ahead, Ravi. I think you started.
No, go ahead, go.
I mean, in terms of enjoying the play, I mean, in my experience, I haven't had the need to worry about that. I think they love it. It's just, I mean, of course, provided it's done well. Otherwise, I think it can be one of the most torturous experiences to sit through a Shakespeare play if it's not done well. But even with Taming, you know, it was really shocking because people enjoyed the play, though they were pissed at the end. I mean, they were howling and clapping and shouting, and it was like at times I was so confused as a director because I couldn't really understand which side are they on. You know, because, and of course, this is what I wanted to have Petruchio played by a woman and to see what happens. And I mean, Petruchio is obviously, you know, it is that kind of a part. So I haven't had the issue of people not enjoying Shakespeare's play, though agree with him or not agree with him. But I have personally experienced them still enjoying it, though coming out and saying that I don't agree with that. I didn't like what I saw. And I'm like, yeah, but there was like, the laughter was huge, you know, at that moment. So I think for me at this stage in my life, I know that this works. Just like Yvette, I have my reservation about like Two Gens, the end of Two Gens. I don't think I'll ever do that play unless I see a production, which I doubt that. But I know that in terms of the language and even the early plays works, so definitely the later ones work. So I haven't had to worry about, you know, the audience so much. It's more about, you know, as what Ravi pointed out, that when, like, the moment I take the play, I'm going to have to edit it. And the moment I start editing, it is an adaptation, in my opinion. I am involved personally in how I put this play on in front of the audience. So I just want to be sure of what I'm doing. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that's bang on. And I would say, you know, the challenge with audience too, in terms of what audience I want, is it's bigger because it's really about, you know, ticket pricing. It's about the space, the location. There's so many actual assumptions about who gets to come already. And so I think that the thing that trying to control those things and trying to open those things up in order to create a kind of more dynamic audience than might usually be there is, I think, an important thing to do. And then I think ultimately it's to have an audience that is willing to challenge its assumptions about all things. And so how do we do that, especially with these plays that everyone comes in thinking that they know, and that and many people come in wanting to see and have the thing confirmed of what they know. And so they'll speak along with the story, or I've heard people say, you know, wow, I watched that production of Hamlet and I kept thinking about how I played Hamlet. And you're like, well, why did you even come? You know, like, to challenge the assumptions. And so we as storytellers must challenge the assumptions of the thing so that we create an environment where we're all doing that and we're all looking for something new. I think that is fundamental. And so much of that comes from who's in the room, because that's all we have, you know, down to Desh, like that's all you have. I might have a shirt, some words, and people in a room. And how do we create that electricity of the unknown for these things that have been around for so long that so many people think they own and they know?
Yes. And I think we are in the moment where this can happen. Like, I think the ideal audience is the audience that is about to come back to the theater, because now we've starved them a bit. They've been on a bit of a diet. Now they're willing to come back and frankly see anything. So if we can do it well, and we can do it it's both familiar and unfamiliar, right? The Shakespeare part is familiar, the name, even if people don't know the plays as well as they think they do, nobody does. Having just translated to, I can tell you, nobody really does know the plays as well as they think they do. But that's what gets them in, is the familiar. And then because they're open to theater right now, they don't want to see the same old thing, because the world has changed since we all shut the doors a year ago or whatever that was.
I would add one thing. We do have a problem in Mumbai theater, is that most of our audience is just other theater people. And that is definitely an issue for us, because it's I don't know. I feel like I don't want to say non-actors, but like people to come and watch the play, because we do so few runs, and normally our audience is just filled with our friends and actors and theater people, and I wonder if they truly watch the play. Like what Ravi said, like how would I play it, or like how many actors does it take to change a light bulb? So
yeah, but I feel that like the work that the three of you are doing is the work that we need to keep Shakespeare alive, in the way that you are offering a new lens for loyal Shakespeare lovers, of which there's obviously many in our audience right now, because people are popping up with, ooh, what if there was this version of this, or what if there was this spin on this play? Giving the loyal Shakespeare fans and nerds, if I dare say so, I think we're 4 nerds right here in this little Zoom screen. And then also opening access up for people who have assumed that Shakespeare is not for them or doesn't have anything to offer. So I think that the work and the questions that you're all asking are really important for the future of Shakespeare, the future of live performance, and something that we're all so starved to get back to. So thank you, all 3 of you, so much. I feel like we could talk forever. And I just want to hear the 3 of you jamming on production concepts and what the future could hold. So excited for that. So thank you so much. To everybody who was here, thank you for attending. This video is going to be online on YouTube a little bit after we finish here. And the Conversations With series has one more session on Friday, April 30th. We are talking about Shakespeare Beyond the Proscenium. We're hearing from artistic directors of 3 outdoor theater companies, Shakespeare companies across Canada, and talking about Shakespeare and the public, the great outdoors. And that should be a really great conversation as well. So thank you, Desh, thank you, Yvette, thank you, Ravi, and thanks everyone else for sharing your Friday with us.
Thanks, Christine. Nice to see you.
Take care. Nice to see you all. Take care. Bye. Bye.